Welcome back to Mean Streets here on Game Plus Network. Chris Meaney, and it is an absolute pleasure. It puts a smile on my face to bring in our next guest, Michael Beller of The Athletic, at mbeller on the Twitter machine. He is a podcast host and producer over at The Athletic. On the fantasy side, you can catch some of his writing. He is the co-host of Fantasy Baseball in 15 and The Athletic Fantasy Football Podcast, and my former co-host of Best on the Board. What a pleasure that was. Beller, welcome in, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Meaney, good to talk to you, man. Good to see your face. Good to talk to you. I love this time of year, man. My favorite sports time of year, with baseball winding up and football picking up. This is a whole lot of fun, and obviously this season is no disappointment.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's going to be great here to get together and talk with you about football. I was really pumping your tires to start the show. As just a guy who virtually I met you on Anthem Sports and Entertainment. You appeared on several different shows, mine, Gary and Thorne's, and then had the pleasure to get to know you over the past couple of years working with you at The Athletic. I know we were going to talk football, but since you said this is your favorite time of the year in baseball, any hot waiver wire guys on the Fantasy Baseball in 15 pod that you talked about this morning? Who is the big hot topic?
I mean, Yanni Hernandez starting to come up and steal bases for the Rangers. He is, he's still 21 bases at AAA Round Rock before getting the call, and now has started 5 straight games at third base and had a couple of steals last night. So if you need some speed and you're still paying attention to fantasy baseball, check out Yanni Hernandez.
Yeah, that's the key. If you're still paying attention, I am still paying attention, but slowly the baseball in this show has kind of dwindled down a little bit, as you know. You and I are going to preview the Chicago Bears, but there's just a couple news notes, some injury things that I wanted to just brush up on and get your thoughts on it. And nobody just wants to hear me talk about it. I want to get other people's thoughts on some of this stuff. So Carson Wentz, last week, it was a 5 to 12 week thing, had the foot surgery, and then Quentin Nelson, very similar, I believe maybe the exact same injury and surgery and timetable, and now on track, both of these guys, for week 1. I didn't adjust Jonathan Taylor too much, but I'll be honest, I moved him down a little bit. Like Chubb, I'd rather Chubb, Najee Harris, Aaron Jones. These were guys I was thinking about over Jonathan Taylor, and then I was thinking that I would be completely out on all of the wide receivers, even though I am a big Michael Pittman guy. This is good news for the Colts. It's good news for people who have drafted Pittman and Taylor already, I do believe. Heck, it's good news for the Eagles. If Wentz can play 70% of the snaps, that will become a first-round pick for them. What's your thoughts overall on this Colts offense and hearing this news?
Very relieved and happy to hear this news, because I am big on Jonathan Taylor and big on Michael Pittman this season. And when it was looking like Wentz was going to miss huge chunks, and it wasn't just the missing the huge chunks, it is, well, what sort of quarterback are we getting when he is back? It was just this total unknown at the quarterback position for the Colts when we thought that Wentz was going to be out for as long as he is. If they're really comfortable saying week 1 is in range for him, then I feel very good moving these guys back up to where they were. Jonathan Taylor's my RB6. I think Michael Pittman can be inside the top 30 at the wide receiver position if things go perfectly for him, and I do feel comfortable with him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, pretty much regardless of what I've got in front of him. But for me, it's really about Jonathan Taylor. I know Nyheim Hines is in the picture, but he caught 36 of 39 targets last year. He was a better pass catcher than people gave him credit for coming out of Wisconsin, and he really is going to take over, I think, in an even larger share of that backfield on the ground than what he had last season. I think of what he did in the second half of the season and expect that for the bulk of the season in terms of how he dominates the carry share in Indy's backfield. I really think that this guy is a rock solid, no doubt about it, RB1 with the top 3 ceiling at the position.
Oh, I love it. Yes, Tino. I know you're smiling too, producing the show. Yeah, we are big Taylor fans here on this show. So you got him RB6. All right, rock solid. And people just want to kind of crap all over what he did in the second half and how he ran over mediocre teams. And we'll get to Dave Montgomery later. People want to give Taylor the pass, but not Montgomery the pass. It's a little strange for me, but at least he had those games against weak opponents. Like if he didn't ball out against those teams, then we would be questioning. But I like that you brought up the catch rate too. I mean, this is a guy that pulled in basically all of the targets that he had. So all systems go for the Colts. As of now, that's what it sounds like. Zach Moss, before we came on here, Beller, we went live. Sean McDermott said that Moss won't practice today, taking it one day at a time. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. I don't know if you're in on Moss. I'll be honest, I was in on him last year. I don't think I'll go down that route this year. And it's not because he burned me. It's just because it's Josh Allen and him calling his own number inside the red zone, and just not a lot of games last year where they were willing to give Moss like double-digit carries, Bell.
Yeah, I would say I'm neither out nor in on Zach Moss. If he falls to me and I feel like I maybe need a little bit of running back help at cost, I think it's a fair price on Zach Moss. And so it really is going to be determined by what my team looks like at that stage of a draft. If I am in or out on him in that particular draft. I do worry about Josh Allen. The guy who I'm really out on in this backfield is Devin Singletary, because I think Matt Breida can bump up and be this team's primary pass-catching back, and he brings an element to the backfield that neither Moss nor Singletary do, and that's some real game-breaking speed. And so I think that Matt Breida is an interesting guy to circle around to late in drafts. I've been doing that in a lot of best ball drafts that I've been in over the last couple of weeks here. But for me, this news itself, day-to-day with the hamstring injury, not moving the needle for a player who really wasn't already moving the needle for me as yet. So if things get a little worse, if things drag on a little bit, maybe I bump Zach Moss down the rankings, but I don't think it's going to have a material difference in how I draft him, the Bills, the position, really anything.
Yeah, I would agree. Singletary's going as RB46 in NFFC drafts over the last 2 weeks. It's slightly high. He did outscore Moss, but he was more involved in the passing attack, and as you mentioned, Matt Breida could maybe chip away at some of that. I don't think there's a lot to really break down here with Rashad Bateman out for weeks, not months. Soft tissue hamstring. With Sammy Watkins seems to be the only wide receiver going right now. Beller, how long does that last in Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a team where I will happily take the quarterback. I'll happily take the running game, and I'm just staying away from the receivers. Mark Andrews, too, sure we can get involved with, but these things that we hear about Sammy Watkins, these things about Rashad Bateman being out weeks, not months, this matters to the Baltimore Ravens, the real-life football team. I don't know how much it really matters in the fantasy world. I love Rashad Bateman. I'm a Big Ten guy. I live in Chicago. I went to Wisconsin. Don't let that color my Jonathan Taylor analysis whatsoever. I watch a lot of Big Ten football. I love what Rashad Bateman did at Minnesota. I think he could be a big player for this team and be someone who changes their fortunes in the playoffs should they get back there. Obviously, we know what has happened to the Ravens over the last couple of seasons in the playoffs. That one-note offense really gets bogged down when they face the cream of the crop defenses. And so I think Bateman could change those fortunes for them should they find themselves back in the playoffs this season, but much more of a real life impact player in 2021 rather than a fantasy impact player. And that was before this injury happened. So wouldn't be a surprise to see him brought along slowly. Maybe we're sitting around talking about him as a waiver guy week 5 or 6, something like that. But I don't think he's going to be someone who any of us is too concerned about in draft season. And that maybe goes for a lot of this wide receiving core.
Yeah, I mean, dead last, the receiving core last season and bottom in terms of passing yards for back-to-back years, I believe, when it comes to the Ravens. And we know what they have with Lamar Jackson and what they can do on the ground. But Bateman is somebody that they really need, I think, to take that next step. And to your point, maybe that next step is just getting through a couple teams in the playoffs and having a passing attack in case they get into those shootouts with the Chiefs, because the Chiefs or the Bills are two teams that they're going to have to go through to get there. Okay, this last one. And I'm just completely torn on DeAndre Swift. I listened to your last podcast with Funston and Seeley, and I thought it was very entertaining. You guys talked about the dead zone RBs, roughly round 3 to round 8. You guys had a nice little fun assignment of just where you went through a draft and you picked guys, and if they outperformed their ADP, you would get extra points, and if they just kind of did not and they were busts, you would lose points. I don't know if Swift was in that range or not, but Swift missing significant practice time, rarely taking part in 7-on-7s, 11-on-11s. Jamal Williams is somebody that I brought in. I actually like the offensive line. I think he could be one of the better offensive lines in football. I think Williams is a capable back. I think he's going to split some touches here with Swift. And I just updated my rankings, Beller, over at ftmfantasy.com, a free article, and I maybe was a little unfair on Swift. I had him at 19. I just don't know. It's going to be a bad offense. Typically, these running backs inside these brutal offenses, if they're part of timeshares, they don't really turn out to be RB1s in fantasy land. Am I looking at that wrong? Do you have a preference? Are you in on Swift? Are you going to take the value on Jamal Williams? He's going as RB42 right now. Williams, I think, is a decent target, especially if you tack wide receivers early. What's your thoughts on this Detroit backfield? It seems like a headache.
Yeah, it really feels like one of those backfields that's going to be more of a headache, too much of a headache to be worth figuring out or trying to figure out. We know those backfields come up every single year, and this is just the prime example of one because you have two good players, two guys who deserve to be out there, two guys who should be getting their touches on a bad offense. And so that's really the perfect setup for it to be a backfield that just isn't really worth your time. He was in that dead zone range, meaning we did have DeAndre Swift in that draft, and I actually ended up taking him. But even though he was the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4th ranked back by ADP in that draft, he was not selected until the 14th spot. So that tells you just how much bust risk we feel is attached to DeAndre Swift. The one thing I think could be his saving grace is that as bad as we're expecting the Lions to be, they've invested quite a bit in the offensive line, and they actually have a pretty good offensive line. It's one of the only things that they've actually invested in on that team. And so if you expect there to be anywhere between competency to very good across all 5 spots of that offensive line, then maybe there will be a little bit more room for Swift and Williams than we are used to seeing from a bad team. And you only have to go back 1 year to find James Robinson as the RB7 on a team that went 1-15. So it's not like being a bad team automatically means the running back can't succeed. My problem with DeAndre Swift is the obvious competition we know that looms from Jamal Williams. James Robinson had 0 competition last season, and just the other running backs that are going in that range. Are you really going to take him over Mike Davis, who we expect to dominate touches for Atlanta? Are you going to take him over David Montgomery, who's going to control the backfield in Chicago, or Chris Carson or Clyde Edwards-Helaire or J.K. Dobbins? It just becomes hard to get on board with him compared with the other players who he's going to be rubbing draft day neighborhood elbows with. So that's really why I'm down on DeAndre Swift. Another guy who at cost I'll take, but I'm not going to be the person who reaches for him.
Yeah, in around that range, all those running backs that you mentioned, I'd rather have as well. And good call on James Robinson. I mean, that was just so fresh. I completely forgot about him having a very solid season and just towards the end of the year, not even really playing. And still ending up as an RB1. And over at FTNFantasy.com, offensive line rankings, we got the Lions at number 6, and I think that's fair to your point. I think they're going to be one of the better offensive lines in football.